You know that feeling when you wake up one day and realize that the life you were living wasn't yours, that you had become a stranger to yourself, living for someone who never truly saw you? My name is Carolina, and I spent years believing that love meant erasing myself. Today I know that the greatest betrayal wasn't his, it was mine, against myself. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If you understand this kind of pain, or if you've ever felt like you were losing yourself trying to please someone, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I want more people to know they're not alone in this journey. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? This story is about rebuilding, and about how sometimes the love we need most comes after the greatest pain. I truly thought I had found the love of my life. When I met Daniel almost 10 years ago, everything seemed like a modern fairy tale. He had that easy smile, that way of looking into your eyes that made you feel like the most important person in the world. Our first date was at a small cafe, one of those with dim lighting and the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with cinnamon. He arrived 5 minutes early, and for me, that already said a lot. We talked for hours. He spoke about his dreams with such brightness in his eyes that I found myself wanting to be part of those dreams. And what was most striking was that he seemed genuinely interested in mine too. He asked about my work, about my family, about what made me wake up happy in the morning. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. In the following months, everything was intense and perfect. He sent me good morning messages with those phrases that make your heart race. He'd show up at my work with flowers as a surprise. We planned weekends together and talked about the future as if it were something concrete, as if we were building a house brick by brick. I remember one night, lying on his living room couch, when he held my hand and said, "You're the center of my world, Carol. I've never felt this way about anyone." And I believed him. With all my heart, I believed him. You know that feeling of finally being chosen? Of thinking, this is it, I've found the right person? That was exactly what I felt. After other frustrating relationships, guys who only wanted something casual, always feeling like the second choice, finally someone had chosen me for real. Or at least that's what I thought. The first 2 years were like living in a pink bubble. We traveled together, met each other's families, and when I decided to get pregnant, it felt like we were sealing that commitment forever. My son was born on a spring morning, with sunlight streaming through the hospital window, and when Daniel held our baby for the first time, I saw tears streaming down his face. That image remained stored in my heart like a perfect photograph, but gradually, so slowly that I barely noticed, small things began to change. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't a dramatic event that destroyed everything at once. It was like sand slipping through your fingers. You only realize you've lost everything when it's already too late. It started with subtle comments about what I wore. I'd put on a dress I'd always loved, that red one that made me feel confident, and he'd frown. "You're going out like that? Isn't it a bit flashy?" He'd say it was just an opinion, that he only cared about me, that he didn't want other people looking at me the wrong way. And I, wanting to avoid conflict, wanting to be the understanding partner, would change clothes. Then came the jokes, the kind that cut you from the inside but come wrapped in laughter. He'd make comments about my body in front of his friends, about how I'd gained weight after pregnancy, about how I'd gotten lazy with my appearance. And when I got hurt, when my eyes filled with tears, and I tried to explain that it hurt, he'd flip it around. "Wow, Carol, you're way too sensitive. It was just a joke. You can't take anything anymore." And I started to believe the problem was really me. He no longer complimented me like before. The flowers stopped appearing. The good morning messages became practical messages. "Don't forget to pay the electric bill," or "What's for dinner?" It seemed that every action I took needed his approval, as if I had to constantly prove that I deserved the love he gave me, or what was left of it. I began to notice that I measured my words before speaking. I'd think 2, 3 times before sharing an opinion. I was afraid of sounding stupid, of saying something he'd judge as idiotic. At family gatherings, I'd stay quiet, smiling, agreeing. I transformed into a dimmed version of myself, and the worst part? I thought this was normal. I thought relationships were like that, full of concessions, of small deaths of the ego, of silences that hurt, but that we swallow to keep the peace. I stopped going out as much with my friends. When they'd call me for lunch, for a movie night, I'd make up excuses. Not because he directly forbade it, but because he made it clear, with that disapproving look, with that tired sigh, that he didn't like it. "You're going to leave me alone again?" he'd say, and I'd feel enormous guilt, as if I were being selfish for wanting a moment to myself. I started dressing the way he liked, hair tied back because he thought it was more elegant, discreet clothes because he said they suited me better. Even my way of speaking changed. I used fewer slang words, laughed more quietly, tried to be more serious because he valued intellectual women. Looking back now, I ask myself, who was that woman? Where was the Carolina who danced in the living room even without music? Who wore red lipstick to the grocery store just because she liked it? Who spoke her mind without fear of being judged? I had completely lost myself, and the worst part was that I thought the problem was me. The emptiness only grew. I slept beside him every night, but felt completely alone. You know that loneliness that hurts more than actually being alone? It's when you share a bed with someone, but feel there's an abyss between you. I'd reach out during the night and touch his back, cold, distant, and wonder if he still loved me, or if he ever truly had. There was one specific night that remained etched in my memory. It was raining outside, that fine, constant rain that makes noise on the window. Our son was already asleep, and I went to the living room where Daniel was on his phone. I sat beside him on the couch, trying to find some connection, some remnant of what we'd been. "Honey, can we talk?" I said, my voice slightly trembling. He didn't even lift his eyes from his phone. "About what?" "About us. I feel like we're distant." He sighed, that sigh that carried impatience, and finally looked at me. "Carol, I'm tired. I worked all day. Can't you choose a better time to talk about these things?" I swallowed my tears and went back to the bedroom. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain, and felt like the most insignificant person in the world. But at that time, I still wasn't ready to see the truth. I kept trying. I'd cook the foods he liked, even when I didn't feel like eating. I'd watch the movies he chose, even though I found them boring. I'd pretend interest in conversations about his work, about colleagues I never met, about projects he never explained properly. I was giving my whole self, emptying myself, thinking that any moment he'd notice my effort and go back to loving me like before. But that day never came. Little did I know that everything was about to crumble, and that the revelation would come from the most innocent mouth in the world. It was a Saturday morning, sunny, one of those that promise a peaceful day. I was getting ready to travel for work, a lecture in another city, something I had postponed several times because I felt guilty about leaving my son, but this time I had to go. I was packing my suitcase in the bedroom, folding clothes, when I heard his little footsteps coming down the hallway. My son had just turned 7, that beautiful age when children still believe in magic, but are beginning to understand the adult world. He entered the room with that shy manner, holding the teddy bear he slept with every night. "Mommy," he called softly. "Hi, my love. Is everything okay?" He approached, looking at the floor, and then came to me. He climbed on the bed, came close to my ear, so close I could feel his warm breath, and whispered, "Mommy, Daddy talks to a woman when you leave. He says she's going to travel with him." In that moment, time stopped. I swear it was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. My entire body froze, from the tips of my fingers to the roots of my hair. My heart started beating so hard I was sure my son could hear it. I felt dizzy, as if the floor had disappeared from under my feet. I looked at him, at that innocent little face, at those clear eyes, waiting for some reaction from me, and didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to process those words, trying to find an explanation that made sense, that wasn't what my heart already knew it was. I forced a smile. I hugged my son so tightly that he complained a little. "It's okay, love. Daddy must be talking about work. Don't worry, okay?" He gave that relieved smile that children give when adults say everything is under control, and ran off to play. But I stayed there, sitting on the edge of the bed, with the suitcase half packed, feeling my world collapse in slow motion. That phrase kept echoing in my mind like a scratched record. A woman, travel with him. I tried to breathe deeply, tried to convince myself it was nonsense, that I was being paranoid, that my son had misunderstood. But deep down, very deep down, I knew. That instinct we try to ignore, that inner voice that shouts the truth we don't want to hear, It was there, clear as crystal. I picked up my phone with trembling hands. For the first time in years, I felt afraid to look at his messages. It wasn't trust anymore. It wasn't love anymore. It was fear. Fear of confirming what my heart had already guessed. I opened his phone. He had left it on the kitchen table. Something he never did. Maybe it was carelessness. Or maybe, deep down, he wanted to be discovered. I didn't need to search much. The messages were there, exposed, raw, devastating. Conversations with her. Photos. Plans. Can't wait to see you again. That hotel you chose is perfect. She's traveling. We'll have the whole weekend. Her. Me. The other woman. The wife. As if we were characters in a story he controlled. And then I saw booking confirmations. A hotel. 2 tickets. Dates that coincided with my work trips. While I was striving to be the perfect wife, he was building a parallel life. I felt as if they had ripped my heart from my chest with bare hands. I dropped the phone on the bed, ran to the bathroom, and locked the door. I sat on the cold floor, leaning against the wall, and finally let the tears come out. I cried in that way that suffocates, that hurts in your chest, that makes your whole body tremble. I covered my mouth with my hands so I wouldn't make noise, so my son wouldn't hear, so no one would know I was falling apart there, alone, on the bathroom floor. Everything started making sense. The delays, the sudden work trips, the moments when he'd step out to take calls, the way he had become distant, cold, irritated with me. It wasn't my fault. It never had been. He was just investing in someone else while I blamed myself for not being enough. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity. When I finally stood up and looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman who was there. Swollen eyes, red face, an expression of defeat that scared me. But something inside me, still small, began to stir. An anger. Not explosive anger, but that cold, determined anger that makes you realize you deserve more. In the following days, I entered a silence that only those who've had their hearts broken understand. I'd smile at my son during the day, play with him, prepare lunch, help with homework. But at night, when he was asleep, I'd fall apart. I'd cry in the shower, with hot water streaming along with my tears, trying to understand where I'd lost myself. I'd sleep hugging my pillow, pressing it against my chest, as if it could fill the emptiness inside me. I confronted Daniel 2 days later. There was no screaming. There was no dramatic fight. It was worse than that. It was that silent, heavy confrontation, where every word weighs a ton. I placed his phone on the table between us and simply said, I know. He didn't even try to deny it. Maybe he was tired of pretending. Maybe he even felt relief. He just lowered his head and stayed silent. How long? I asked, with a voice firmer than I imagined I could manage. Almost a year. 365 days of lies, of making me feel crazy, too sensitive, too problematic, while he built a life with someone else. Do you love me? I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it. He took so long to answer that the answer came before the words, and when he finally spoke, it was worse than silence. I don't know, Carol. And there, in that phrase, died what remained of what I thought we had. I blamed myself for not seeing it before, for believing so much, for erasing myself, thinking that was love. I blamed myself for every outfit I stopped wearing, for every opinion I swallowed, for every time I chose silence over confrontation. The pain became my constant companion in the following months. Every place in the house reminded me of him. The table where we ate together, the couch where we watched movies, the bed where I slept alone even when he was beside me. Everything had a ghost, a memory that hurt. The mirror became my greatest enemy. I avoided looking at myself because the woman I saw wasn't who I wanted to be. I saw a tired person, without brightness, with deep dark circles and an empty gaze. I'd lost weight, but not in a healthy way. It was the weight of sadness, of food that wouldn't go down, of sleepless nights. It was as if everything I was had mixed with the pain of being deceived. My friends tried to help. They'd call, send messages, show up at my house with food and hugs, but I couldn't completely open up. I was ashamed of being the only one who didn't notice, ashamed of having believed so much, ashamed of not being enough for him. There was one particularly difficult night, about 3 weeks after the discovery. I was lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, when my son entered the room. He climbed into bed and lay beside me, so small, and held my hand. "Mommy, why are you sad?" I tried to smile. "Sometimes we get sad, love, but it passes." "Did Daddy make you sad?" My heart tightened. Children notice everything, even when we think we're hiding it well. "Don't worry about that, okay? Mommy will be fine." He hugged me, that innocent and pure child's embrace, and whispered, "You're the best mommy in the world." And it was there, in that embrace, that something began to break inside me. Not the sadness, the prison I had built around my pain. I had a son who loved me unconditionally, who saw me as a hero, even when I felt defeated. And suddenly I realized I was letting that man steal not just my present, but also my son's future. He deserved a whole, happy, strong mother, and I deserved to give myself that chance. But life, even when it seems cruel, always finds a way to teach us. The turnaround didn't come overnight. It wasn't a moment of sudden enlightenment. It was a painful, slow process of dismantling piece by piece everything I thought I knew about myself and about love. One day, I looked at myself in the mirror, that mirror that had become my enemy, and forced myself not to look away. I stood there, still, looking at that broken woman, and said out loud, even though my voice came out shaky, "I'm tired of feeling small." It was the first time I admitted that to myself, and with that admission, something changed. I sought help, something I had postponed because I thought it was weakness, that it was admitting defeat. But actually, it was the most courageous thing I'd ever done. I started therapy on a Thursday afternoon, in a small room with soft light and the smell of lavender. The psychologist was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, who didn't judge me when I broke down in the very first session. "Why wasn't I enough?" was the first thing I asked her between sobs. And she looked at me with such compassion that I felt like crying even more, and said, "Carol, you were always enough. The problem was never you." Those words took weeks to truly sink in. We don't unlearn in days what took years to internalize. But, session after session, I began to deconstruct the lies I had believed about myself, that I was too sensitive. Lie, that I was problematic. Lie, that I needed his approval to have value. The biggest lie of all. I started doing small things that gave me pieces of myself back. I bought red lipstick, that vibrant red he hated, and wore it to the supermarket. It seems silly, but I felt powerful. I put loud music on in the living room and danced alone, awkwardly, laughing at myself, not caring if I looked ridiculous. I went back to hanging out with my friends. At first it was difficult. I felt out of place, as if I'd forgotten how to be social, how to really laugh. But they were patient. They took me by the hand and reminded me of who I was before I got lost. I had one friend in particular, Julia, who was my safe harbor. She had gone through something similar years before and understood me in a way no one else could. One night, I was at her house drinking wine. I had barely touched my glass, but she insisted it was therapeutic. When she told me something that changed my perspective, "Carol, do you know what's the difference between us and them? We love for real. We give everything, without fear, without calculation. And you know why? Because we're brave. Those who cheat, who lie, who deceive, are cowards. He's the coward in this story, not you." That resonated inside me. I wasn't weak for having truly loved. I was strong. And him? He was the coward who preferred to destroy something real rather than have the courage to be honest. I began to truly take care of myself, not in an obsessive or punitive way, but in a loving way. I went back to walking in the park early in the morning, when the sun was still rising and the world was quiet. Those walks became sacred. It was the moment when I talked to myself, without filters, without judgment. I went back to painting, something I loved when I was younger but had abandoned. I bought paints, canvases, brushes, and turned a corner of the house into my creative space. It didn't matter if the paintings turned out beautiful or not. What mattered was that while I painted, I felt alive again. Each brushstroke was a way to put out the pain, the anger, the sadness, and gradually, also the hope. I made new friends. I joined a support group for women going through similar situations. Hearing their stories was, at the same time, devastating and liberating. Devastating because I realized how much pain exists in the world, how many women erase themselves for love, how many stories similar to mine exist. But liberating because, for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel like the only fool who believed too much, loved too much, gave too much. There was one woman in that group, Mariana, who told me something that stuck. We're not victims for having been hurt. We're victims if we choose to stay trapped in that pain. And I decided I wasn't going to stay trapped. I reconnected with my faith too. Not in a dogmatic religious way, but in a spiritual, connected way. I started meditating in the morning. Before my son woke up, I'd sit on the living room floor, close my eyes, breathe deeply, and try to connect with something greater than my pain. Some mornings were easy. Others, I'd spend the entire 15 minutes crying, unable to calm my mind. But I persisted. I learned to be grateful. It seemed impossible at first. Grateful for what? For being betrayed? For having suffered? But gradually I understood that I was being grateful for the strength I was discovering within myself, for the opportunity to reinvent myself, for the chance to build a life that was truly mine. Every small victory became a celebration. Waking up without crying, spending an entire day without thinking about him, being able to sleep through the night, really laughing at a silly joke, looking in the mirror, and smiling at myself. They seem like small things, but when you're climbing out of rock bottom, each step is a monumental achievement. There was one specific moment that marked my power shift. It was about 6 months after the separation. I was at the park with my son, watching him play on the playground, when a woman sat beside me on the bench. We started chatting casually, the way mothers do in these places, and at some point she commented, "You have a beautiful energy. You can tell you're happy." I was shocked. Happy? Me? After everything I'd been through? But then I realized it was true. There, in that moment, watching my son laugh, feeling the sun on my face, talking to a kind stranger, I was happy, truly. It wasn't fake happiness, forced, performative. It was real happiness that came from within, that I had built with my own hands. And in that moment, I understood that I had won. Not won against him, or the other woman, or the situation. I had won against the version of myself that believed I needed someone to be complete. Time passed, and with it, the weight too. Not overnight, not in a linear way. There were relapses. There were days when sadness returned like a wave and dragged me down again. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep. There were moments when anger was so intense I wanted to call him and scream everything I felt. But those moments became increasingly rare and increasingly short. The pain that was once constant became occasional. The tears that once wouldn't stop falling became sporadic. And the feeling of emptiness was being filled, not by another person, but by myself. I learned to enjoy my own company. You know that fear of being alone I had? I discovered it was the best gift I could give myself. I came to appreciate my solitary nights. After my son went to sleep, I'd make tea, put on soft music, read a book, or simply stay there, in silence, with myself. And it was okay. More than okay. It was complete. I changed my bedroom too. I removed everything that reminded me of him. I bought new sheets, redecorated, put in plants, moved the furniture around. I transformed that space into my sanctuary, a place where I felt safe, at peace, without ghosts from the past. I went back to studying. I had postponed for years the idea of getting a specialization, always making excuses, always prioritizing others. But now it was my turn. I enrolled in a course, and studying again made me feel alive in a way I had forgotten. I was investing in myself, in my future, in my career. My son noticed the change. He didn't understand all the details, of course, but he noticed that his mother was lighter, more present, happier, and that was all that mattered. A year after the separation, I was unrecognizable, not physically, although I had gone back to taking care of my health, exercising, eating well, but internally, I had been reborn. It was as if the old Carol had died on that bathroom floor, crying, and a new Carol had emerged from the ashes. I ran into Daniel once by chance at the supermarket. It was strange, but not painful. He was with her, the other woman, who I now knew was named Claudia. They were arguing about something near the produce section, and you could tell from their body language that they weren't doing well. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, wanted to think serves him right, but the truth is I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not satisfaction, just indifference. He saw me, and his look was one of discomfort. I waved briefly with a small smile and continued my shopping. When I left the supermarket, I felt lighter. I didn't need the dramatic confrontation, didn't need revenge, didn't need explanations or apologies. He no longer had power over me, and that was true liberation. Today, I look back and see a complete journey, from rock bottom to here. And I won't lie saying it was easy, because it wasn't. It was the hardest thing I've ever faced. But it was also the most transformative. I discovered that true love doesn't begin in another heart. It begins inside us. We spend so much time looking for external validation, looking for someone to make us feel complete, that we forget completeness is already here, inside us. It just needs to be rediscovered. I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfishness. It's survival. It's necessity. It's the most revolutionary act a woman can do in a society that teaches us we have to erase ourselves for others. Saying, "I deserve more," isn't arrogance. It's recognition of your own worth. I learned that being alone isn't synonymous with loneliness. In fact, I discovered I was lonelier when I was with him than now, sleeping alone every night. Because true loneliness is not having yourself, not knowing yourself, not loving yourself. And I now have all three. I learned to forgive myself. Forgive for having believed, for having trusted, for having erased myself. Forgive the Carolina who thought she needed to be less so he could be more. Forgive the woman who looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. She was doing the best she could with the tools she had. And now I have better tools. I learned to forgive him too. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Carrying anger is like taking poison expecting the other person to die. I decided to let go. Let go of the anger, the hurt, the need to understand why he did what he did. In the end, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I came out the other side stronger. I learned that we're much more resilient than we imagine. When you're in the middle of the storm, you think you'll drown. But there's something inside us, a primitive, ancestral force that makes us float, that makes us survive. We're made of fire and water, of strength and delicacy, and no one can extinguish that. I learned that healing isn't linear. There are good days and bad days. There are days when you wake up feeling invincible, and days when sadness returns out of nowhere. And that's okay. We don't need to always be strong, always happy, always fine. We can be human. We can have relapses. The important thing is not giving up. I learned that the world doesn't end when a relationship ends. It seems like it does. It seems like life has lost meaning, but it's a lie. Life continues. The sun continues rising. Flowers continue blooming. And we continue too, even when we think we won't make it. And I learned, above all, that I don't need anyone's approval to feel sufficient. For years, I measured my worth by others' eyes, by his eyes mainly. If he thought I was beautiful, I was beautiful. If he thought I was intelligent, I was intelligent. If he thought I was worthy of love, I was worthy of love. But the truth is, I was always beautiful, always intelligent, always worthy of love. He just didn't have eyes to see. And that says everything about him, and nothing about me. Today, when I look at myself in the mirror, I see a woman completely different from the one who cried on the bathroom floor. I see strength, I see beauty, I see depth, I see scars, yes, but scars that tell a story of survival. And I'm proud of that woman. Not because I found someone new, not because I got over it in the traditional sense of the word, but because I finally found myself. And that's the real success story here. People ask me if I'd have the courage to love again, to trust again, to give myself again. And the answer is yes, but not in the same way. Now I know I can love someone without losing myself. I can give myself without erasing myself. I can trust while maintaining my autonomy. And most importantly, now I know that if someone makes me choose between self-love and love for another, I'll choose myself, always, because the right person won't make me choose. The right person will love me exactly as I am, without wanting to diminish me, without wanting to change me, without wanting to control me. My son is growing up watching a strong, independent, happy mother, and that's the most important legacy I can leave for him. For him to grow up understanding that women are forces of nature, who deserve to be loved with respect, with admiration, with reciprocity, and that he never, ever treats a woman the way his father treated me. As for Daniel, I hope he's found what he was looking for. I sincerely hope he's happy, not because he deserves it. That's no longer mine to judge, but because I deserve to move forward without the weight of anger. And I also hope he learned something, that he understood you don't build happiness on the foundation of lies. That betrayal doesn't bring peace, it brings paranoia. That when you destroy someone who truly loved you, you also destroy the chance of having something genuine. But, at the end of the day, his story doesn't interest me anymore. My story is different, and it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's mine. Today I know that losing someone can be the first step to finding yourself. It sounds cliché, I know, but it's the purest truth I can share. That painful loss, that betrayal that shattered me into 1,000 pieces, gave me the opportunity to rebuild myself the way I always wanted to be. And that whisper, that innocent whisper from my son that once destroyed me, was also what woke me up to life. It was the push I needed to stop pretending everything was fine, to stop erasing myself, to stop living a lie. Sometimes things need to break completely for us to have the courage to rebuild. And when we rebuild with our own hands, aware of each brick we place, the result is infinitely more solid, more true, more ours. So, if you're going through something similar now, if you're feeling this pain that seems like it will never pass, if you're blaming yourself, diminishing yourself, losing yourself, I want you to know something. You will survive. Not only that, you will flourish. The pain you're feeling now isn't the end. It's the beginning of your true story, of your true strength, of your true life. And when you're on the other side looking back, you'll understand that the person who hurt you didn't take anything from you. They only showed you what you don't want, what you don't accept, what you don't deserve. And that paradoxically is a gift, because now you know. You know your worth, you know your strength, you know you can count on yourself, always, and that knowledge, no one can take from you. I didn't write this story for you to pity me, or to hate him. I wrote it because someone needs to hear that it's possible. It's possible to climb out of rock bottom. It's possible to rebuild. It's possible to be happy again. Not despite the pain, but through it. Life didn't end when he left. Actually, it began. And today, when I look to the future, I no longer see fear. I see infinite possibilities. I see a woman who knows who she is, who knows what she wants, who isn't afraid of being alone because she knows she never is. She has herself, and that, my love, is all we need. If this story touched you in some way, if you saw yourself in some part of it, if you felt you're not alone, leave a heart in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Sometimes a story can be the push someone needs to begin their own healing journey. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories, stories of real women, stories of pain, but also of overcoming, because we need to stop pretending everything is always perfect. We need to be honest about pain, about falls, about new beginnings, and never, never forget, you are enough. You always have been, exactly the way you are, with all your imperfections, with all your mistakes, with all your humanity. You are enough, and you deserve a love that reminds you of that every day, starting with your own.